He was the last of the prisoners dragged through the ash-lined corridors of the Onvuran capital, his boots scraping the obsidian floor as he was shoved past. Relics of dead civilizations melted into the walls like fossilized screams. The guards were masks of bone and light, but he only saw the one who waited at the end, the Empress of 1,000 systems, a creature crowned in gold, with hair like living flame. Her throne was carved from the crust of a shattered star, and her voice slithered like fire through air. When she spoke, it made the others fall to their knees. Narrowing, she said, "Bow to me, human." And he laughed, his teeth bloody and bare, not as a weapon, but as a dare. And the chamber fell silent like breath before a storm, because no one had ever refused her and lived. They tore his shirt. They split the ground under him with shocks of neural pain. They threw him into the pit beneath the palace, where the monsters roamed, half-starved and mindless, where prisoners disappeared and were never seen again. The guards laughed as they closed the gate behind him, but they did not know what Earth bred in its final years. They did not know what war raised in the hearts of men who saw their cities burn and came out still walking, still fighting, still smiling when the odds snapped their bones. So he walked through the dark, the air hot and heavy like breath from a dying god. And the creatures came at him, their claws humming with poison, their eyes mindless with rage. And he moved like someone dancing with death, but never breathing slow, eyes glowing faint in the dark, because pain was just the start and rage was older than his blood. She watched him through the smoke-fed glass of her scrying pool, her hands resting on the coils of her dress made of screaming silk. She had seen warriors fall, kings break, species whimper for mercy when she raised her voice, but this one stood in the pit, like it was a throne, like he belonged nowhere else. And when he looked up, she felt something old and sharp shiver along her spine. Not fear, not yet, but a question, one that had not been asked of her in lifetimes. What does it mean to face something that cannot be bent? What does it mean when a slave stands tall and dares the gods themselves? So she ordered his release, not to free him, but to understand what kept him from falling. She summoned him again to the throne room, this time without chains, and when he arrived, bruised and bare, but unbroken, she said again, "Bow to me, human." And again he laughed, and again the room held its breath. They gave him a blade, dull and ceremonial, for the games in the arena, where champions fought for sport and glory and her amusement. And they sent beasts after him, machines fused with flesh, things engineered to test reflex and heart. But he turned every contest into a lesson, not in brutality, but in intent. Because every time he moved, it was not for survival, it was for something deeper, for defiance, for the dead, for the home that no longer burned because it had already become ash. He killed with precision, but never hate. He bled and smiled, he staggered and roared. And the people began to chant his name, not as mockery, but in awe, because they had never seen a creature who did not beg, who did not plead, who faced the impossible and spat in its eye. And the Empress watched again, silent as stone, as the people's eyes turned not to her, but to him. She called him to her private chamber, where no mortal had ever walked unbound, and she said, "The war comes to an end. The council demands blood. But I see use in you." She moved like fire laced with grace, her words woven from promises and poison. She said, "Rule beside me, beneath me. Teach me this thing you call freedom, this thing that makes your kind bleed and smile at the same time." And he said, "No, not because of pride, but because he saw the trap, the one where he would become her blade, her beast, her favorite enemy. Bound by chains, no one could see. He said, "I am not your lesson, I am not your bridge, I am the storm you tried to cage, and now it has teeth." And she rose, furious, divine, her body flickering through spectrums of wrath and shadow. And she said, "Then you die tonight." And he said, "No, I will live, and you will. Remember that you asked a man to bow, and he bared his teeth instead." The war began with one word. No, it echoed through the chambers, through the minds of those who had forgotten what rebellion looked like, through the hearts of the broken who had waited for a sign. And they rose with stones and stolen blades, with songs in their mouths and fire in their steps. The palace burned from its base to its spires, and the Empress stood in the ruins, facing him, her hair ash now her throne cracked her breath a trembling thing, and she said, "Why do you not kneel? Not even now?" And he stepped forward through the embers, through the memory of every soul she had crushed, and said, "Because you never understood to kneel is not weakness, but to kneel by force is slavery, and I was born free." And she fell to her knees, not in worship, not in defeat, but in understanding. And he turned away, not as a conqueror, but as a reminder that humanity had not vanished. It had only been waiting for the moment to rise, teeth bared, voice steady, and heart burning brighter than the stars. The fires had faded, but the echo remained in the bones of the world. In the eyes of those who watched from orbit in silence, ships once sworn to the Empress, now drifting, unsure of where to aim their cannons, of who to call master. The galaxy had never seen such a moment, not of victory, not of surrender, but of silence thick as gravity. And the humans stood at the highest step of the broken days where the Empress had once ruled, where millions had bowed without question. And he said a single word, not shouted, not roared, but spoken like a blade sliding free from its sheath. The word was rise, and it rippled outward like heat, through void, through stars, through borders drawn in blood and fear, and across the systems. People stood slowly, in salute, but in awakening. Slaves turned their eyes skyward and saw a man who had stood unbent in the face of a god, and whispered, "If he could, then why not me?" And the Empress, who still knelt in the ash, raised her head, not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with something like reverence, and said softly to herself, "I asked him to kneel, and he taught me to stand." And the galaxy turned not toward emperors, not toward thrones, but toward the voice that had said no, and meant it with every fiber of a broken